Hello and welcome to this episode of The Psych Nurse. I'm your host Jen, and today is a special episode because it's the very first one. So what is the podcast all about? And what will we be covering? In short, I'll be using my background and experience in forensic mental health to delve into some of the most shocking and disturbing crimes with the goal of understanding the psychology behind them. Why do some people commit such heinous acts? What goes on in the minds of those who end up in a forensic setting? During my training as a mental health nurse, I became deeply fascinated by the patients I encountered in forensic environments, not just their diagnosis, but the history, motivations, and thought processes. This podcast is about exploring those questions. We'll unpack real cases, examine the psychological factors at play, and break down complex mental health topics in a way that's informative, respectful, and eye-opening. As this is the first episode, I am going to go in heavy with a case of extreme cruelty. Please be warned that this episode contains themes that you will likely find very distressing. I had to stop multiple times actually during this research. When I was researching the case, I felt physically sick and I cried at certain parts of it. So this is not an easy episode to listen to, and it certainly wasn't an easy episode to make. This case will force us to question not just the individuals involved, but also the broader psychological, societal and digital frameworks that allow this type of cruelty to not only exist, but thrive. We're going to unravel how one woman from Scotland became deeply embedded in a sprawling, disturbing international network of animal torture, and what that tells us about the darkest parts of the human psyche. We're going to look into the case of Natalie Herron, a woman from Scotland who became a key player in a global monkey torture ring. This story is as horrifying as it is unprecedented. Herron's case marked the first time someone in the UK was convicted for animal cruelty offences committed entirely abroad via online platforms. The material she distributed showed monkeys being crucified, mutilated, boiled alive and killed on camera. Oh, it's just absolutely horrific, but I shall go on. All at the request of a paying audience. Herron didn't just watch, she organised, she paid for it, she helped run it. She took part in online polls that determined the fate of these innocent baby monkeys. In June 2025 at Airdrie Sheriff Court, she was sentenced to 2 years and 3 months in prison after pleading guilty to possessing and distributing obscene animal torture videos. These videos and messages were part of a depraved online community involving people from the US, UK and Southeast Asia. And this was no fringe chat group. This was a structured, sadistic community with polling, paywalls, and even fan favourites, like a long-tailed macaw named Minnie, who was eventually rescued, thank goodness. Herron's co-conspirators included a man nicknamed the Torture King, Michael McCartney, who was convicted in the US for leading the network. Much of this case was also explored in the chilling BBC documentary Monkey Haters, which detailed the global torture ring and the money it generated through sites like OnlyFans and Telegram. Investigators described the operation as one of the most disturbing they had ever seen. So before we unpack Herron's psychology, we need to be clear about what we mean by animal abuse. Animal abuse can be defined as the intentional infliction of harm, suffering, or death on animals, often for personal gain, pleasure, or power. It ranges from neglect and hoarding to deliberate torture and execution, as we can unfortunately see in this case. Animal abuse is increasingly being recognised not just as a cruelty issue, but as a form of antisocial behaviour, linked to deeper psychopathology. This recognition is important because it forces a shift in how we view perpetrators of such crimes, not merely as cruel or heartless, but potentially as psychologically disturbed individuals who pose risks beyond animals. Research has established connections between animal abuse and future violent behaviour towards humans, reinforcing why these crimes cannot be dismissed or minimised. So let's look at Herron again. So her actions were not impulsive or accidental. She took part in this network for over a year, collected over 1,000 images and videos on her phone, and she sent nearly 4,000 messages discussing torture methods and transferred money to commission videos where monkeys were tortured and killed. This level of engagement requires more than just passive interest. It suggests obsession, compulsion, and cruelty. To understand this, we need to dig into forensic psychology, particularly the theories that explain how and why someone might take pleasure in such violence. In this case, we're not talking about someone who stumbled into darkness by accident. We're talking about someone who sought it out, who stayed in it, and who escalated their participation over time. There is no doubt that I can't even call her a human being, to be frank, this monster has perpetrated on these poor defenceless animals. There is no reasoning or justification, and this podcast is not in any way trying to validate her reasons behind doing what she did. But what we are looking to do is understand the psyche behind it. So we're not minimising what she's done. We're not saying, well, at least it wasn't a human being. But the research that we have gathered over time will indicate that the more somebody is looking at actively abusing animals or teasing them, it might lead to then, they start poking them, and then it might lead to sort of torture methods, and then it might, eventually go to death. So that process often will then, in effect, lead on to something more. It might be that they start by, pulling the wings off a fly, for instance, and then it might be that they have a little rabbit that they have as a pet in their garden, and then one day the rabbit is found dead, and then so on and so forth. So it might be that the challenges become bigger, and the expectation of what they need in order to satisfy this urge to hurt and to harm something can get greater and greater, and eventually they could then hurt a child or an adult. According to the academic research published in the National Institutes of Health PMC database, animal cruelty is a key indicator of what's known as antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, and its developmental precursor conduct disorder, or CD. The DSM-4 is something that I am very used to using within a medical setting, as are many other mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health nursing, etc. It's a diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders. Now, in this manual, it lists animal cruelty as one of the diagnostic criteria for conduct disorder. One study in particular listed 9 specific behavioural features typical of perpetrators of animal abuse. These are as follows: enjoying or being aroused by the suffering of animals, repetition of abuse over time, lack of remorse or empathy, escalation of cruelty, participation in group cruelty with peer reinforcement, making suggestions or requests for abuse, paying or incentivising others to commit abuse, wanting to increase suffering for sadistic satisfaction, and finally keeping trophies or revisiting content of cruelty. Now, Natalie Herron's behaviour aligns with every single one of these indicators. She actively joins multiple torture-themed chat groups, stored footage, discussed methods like boiling monkeys alive or crucifying them, and voted in polls to determine how monkeys should be tortured. She even financially contributed to these acts. Her messages to others showed a total absence of empathy and a disturbing enthusiasm for the suffering of these poor defenceless animals. This isn't the behaviour of someone watching out of curiosity. It's someone deeply embedded in a system of violence, someone who wanted the animals to suffer, really wanted that. According to the cited research, this level of engagement may indicate ASPD, especially in individuals with a history of trauma or early exposure to violence. ASPD is characterised by a disregard for the rights of others, deceitfulness, impulsivity, aggression, and a lack of remorse. So these traits we can see clearly in Herron's case. Her participation wasn't driven by ignorance or coercion. It was deliberate, repeated, and fully engaged. Clinical psychologists studying similar cases point out that offenders often display a callous, unemotional profile, which can be a precursor to full-blown psychopathy in severe cases. Defence arguments hinted that Herron had experienced horrific problems in life. While specifics were not made public, it's important to note that childhood trauma, neglect, and early exposure to violence are all known to contribute to the development of conduct disorder, which can progress into ASPD in adulthood. If violence becomes normal, whether it's seen, experienced, or emotionally associated with power, it no longer has the ability to shock. It becomes entertainment or, worse, empowerment. Herron's descent into cruelty didn't happen overnight. It appears to have started with graphic human violence videos. She eventually became numb to the suffering and began seeking more extreme content, turning to animal abuse for stimulation. This gradual desensitisation process is a recognised phenomenon in the psychology of serial abusers. It's a pattern of escalating cruelty, each step pushing further beyond moral and social boundaries. Herron was also described as finding a false sense of connection and belonging in these online groups. This is often how individuals become radicalised into fringe, violent ideologies. The monkey torture network wasn't just anonymous sadists, it was an active community. A place where Herron could gain attention, approval, and influence. It became part of her online identity, if you like. In spaces where violence is normalised and rewarded, it's easy for someone like Herron, who is isolated, traumatised, and seeking validation, to become absorbed. These chat rooms become echo chambers of depravity. Members competed to share the most shocking videos. They praised one another's contributions. In such an environment, empathy is not only absent, it's penalised. Her descent into this world began with watching decapitation videos online. That compulsive media consumption, without social or moral boundaries, desensitised her over time. By the time she was helping to organise torture sessions for paying subscribers, the violence had become familiar, routine, expected. It's critical to understand that this was not just a fetish group. It was a money-making enterprise. Michael McCartney, aka the Torture King, ran the group like a business. Viewers from around the world, including Herron, sent money to individuals in Indonesia and the Philippines to carry out specific torture acts. Victims like Minnie, the long-tailed macaw, who was eventually named, tracked and rescued. There were financial tiers in this system. Premium payers got to vote on how monkeys were tortured, in the most horrific ways, and some even made specific requests. This wasn't just sadism, it was monetized sadism, and it thrived because of platforms that allowed it to hide in plain sight. It's unclear how many animals were killed before the operation was disrupted, but the damage is undeniable. The footage was sold, streamed, and downloaded thousands of times. This was cruelty as commerce, a dark marketplace driven by human depravity, technological anonymity, and profit. Natalie Herron's case is a landmark conviction, not only for the international scale of the crime, but for what it reveals about how online communities can foster extreme cruelty under the cover of anonymity, financial reward, and psychological disturbance. Herron may never have physically harmed an animal herself, but her desire to cause harm, her obsession with violence, and her leadership in these networks made her a key perpetrator. Whether driven by trauma, compulsion, or antisocial personality traits, her actions show us a terrifying blueprint of how seemingly normal individuals can descend into organised cruelty, and how the internet can turn that cruelty into content. The psychological warning signs were there: emotional detachment, compulsive media consumption, radicalisation by peer validation, and desensitisation through exposure. If we don't confront this kind of abuse at the psychological and structural level, we risk letting it fester in the darkest corners of the web. Because as we've seen, there's always someone watching. Thank you for staying with me through this incredibly heavy episode. I know this wasn't easy to listen to, but these stories matter. They reveal uncomfortable truths about how cruelty can hide in digital corners, how vulnerable people can spiral into horror, and how justice, though slow, can sometimes break through. If today's episode moved you, disturbed you, or made you think differently about the dark intersections of psychology, then please consider supporting this podcast.